My name is Ann Mason. I'm the Executive Director of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society. And with me this evening is Bob Hoxie, who is a garden designer and horticulturist. He has a diverse background in landscape design, fine gardening, and historic landscape creation. And many of you know Bob because he was instrumental in designing and planting the Rose T. Briggs Memorial Garden here at the Hedge House Museum. And that garden project started in 2010 and was finished in 2013. And since 2013, Bob has also taken care of the garden. So the next time you're at the Hedge House, you can certainly admire his work, even with the drought of this summer and with everything that's been happening on the front lawn, it still is blooming beautifully and is just a really lovely place to be. Bob owns Great Hill Horticultural Services, which is a full-service gardening and design company working across Cape Cod and the South Shore. And what we wanted to do tonight was share with you a sort of a behind-the-scenes look at the landscaping project that's been happening at the Antiquarian Society's Hedge House Museum on Water Street. This project has been in the works for at least 5 years, so it predates my time coming onto the Antiquarian Society. But the goal behind the project was to give our flagship property the setting it deserves. So to make sure that the landscape, the lawn was both beautified and that the house was secure and that we had control over the property so that we could host events safely. And I just wanted, as we begin, I wanted to thank some of the key players who have been involved with this project. So really it was the brainchild of the Antiquarian Society board, more than 5 years ago, and Donna Curtin, who was executive director at that time. And working closely with them was local architect Bill Forniciari, who developed the initial plans and designs. And then more recently, we have been working with landscape architect Ray Dunetz, who is out of Boston. And he finished the designs and created all the construction documents. And overseeing this process has been, of course, our Antiquarian Society board, as well as our preservation committee members. And none of this would be possible except for all of the support that has come from the community, from Plymouth Antiquarian Society members, and from our donors. So thank you very much for making this project possible. And again, we're very excited to share a little update with you. So as we begin, I just wanted to start by looking at the house and considering how its setting has changed over the years. So I think probably most of you are familiar with the story of the Hedge House, which was built in 1809 and was not built in its current location on Water Street, but was built where Memorial Hall is today on Court Street in Plymouth. And so this is a view of the house in its original location. And you can see in its original location, it had a very modest wooden fence on its border with Court Street. And I have another view here that shows the house again in its original location and shows the continuation of that fence. This dirt road that you see next to the house was actually Hedges Place, which is now Memorial Drive. But the Antiquarian Society was founded in 1919 to save the Hedge House from demolition and moved to its waterfront location in 1924. And so when it was moved, it presented a whole set of landscaping challenges and opportunities for the Antiquarian Society. So what ended up happening is that they purchased not only the lot on which the house sits, but also an adjoining lot at the front of the property, which had been occupied by a warehouse built around 1880. That building was razed by the Antiquarian Society in 1927, and then they began planning for the landscaping of this new waterfront property. And this photograph shows it around the time that it was completed in 1932. And you can see that they installed a very graceful federal style wooden fence, actually modeled after a fence that surrounds the King Caesar House in Duxbury, which was built the same year. And they also intended that the front lawn would have a series of plantings. At the same time, they were planting what we call the Rose Briggs Memorial Garden behind the Hedge House. And you can see here that at the front of the house, they had a boxwood bordered garden, and they had many different trees that they planted as well. So this gave the Hedge House a rather grand setting. This is a photograph from the 1970s that shows one of the Antiquarian Society members, again, in front of that front gate. And you can see how the trees have grown. You can see how that boxwood bordered garden is still there in what is now empty space at the Hedge House. But you can also tell that the wooden fence is starting to deteriorate in this picture. The location of the Hedge House is, of course, very vulnerable to ocean breezes and storms, and of course, wood is just very vulnerable in general to rain and snow. And so over time, wooden elements had to be replaced and were patchworked in. And that left us ultimately in 1975, the Antiquarian Society made a decision to replace that wooden fence with a tubular steel fence. And in this photograph from 2015, you can see that after, the 40 years since it had been installed, that steel fence was in very, very degraded condition, dilapidated condition. It was rusting, it was falling down in places, the wooden columns were rotting out. And from this photograph, you can also see that, again, that boxwood bordered garden is now gone. We do have a set of granite steps that often people ask us about because they seem to lead to nowhere, and they originally led to that boxwood bordered garden, so that those steps are still there floating in the lawn. And then you can see that the southern boundary of the property, where we border with Mamma Mia's Italian restaurant, we have lost the trees and the plantings on that side. And in 2015, we had just a chain link fence to provide that boundary. So this is what we were looking at and hoping to improve, to beautify, to make sure the property was secure, and to enhance it for future functions. And you can see one of the concerns about having functions on the lawn at that time was that there was a lot of uneven ground. So it's actually, I'm not sure how well you can see it when you have from Zoom here, but this whole section of the grass is sunken in. This apple tree that's in the foreground actually came down in a storm shortly after this photograph was taken. And so there was a large stump that was left there. And again, just the ground was very uneven. It made it difficult to use the full lawn for community events and antiquarian events. So the big question is, what would we do with the property? How would we improve it? And the most visible part of the project is of course the fence itself. And that would define the new frontage for the Hedge House. So in looking for inspiration for the fence, we turned to the work of Joseph Everett Chandler. Chandler was born in Plymouth. He was a Plymouth leading architect in the 1920s and 30s. He was a descendant of William Harlow. The Antiquarian Society owns the Harlow House on Sandwich Street, and Chandler had actually worked with them during the restoration of the Harlow House when it was first acquired by the Society. And he had also helped create some landscape plans for the Hedge House itself in its Water Street location. So we turned to Chandler's work in Plymouth, and he was responsible for the restoration of what is now the Mayflower Society House on Winslow Street. And here we have a couple of photographs of the brickwork that is on the Mayflower Society House property, creating their fence. And we looked to this as sort of providing the model for a colonial revival style fence. We picked up some elements from this design, including the Flemish bond brick pattern. So you can see just the way that the bricks are laid with the head of the brick interspersed with the full length of the brick. And so we, had many different designs, many different conceptions that were being debated, all of which, of course, had to be refined due to budget considerations and just questions of maintenance and other things. The designs had to be reviewed by the Massachusetts Historical Commission and Plymouth Historic District Commission. And so taking all of this together, it did take us some time. But in March, we were very excited to sign a contract with Sheridan Landscaping of Plymouth. They were the winning bid for the project, and we were ready to break ground and get going. And it was sort of estimated the project would take, probably 2 months or 3 months. But unfortunately, right at that time, the pandemic shutdown happened. And so we were obviously having to change course in a lot of different areas. Some of the work could continue on the exterior landscaping, but there were, of course, some supply delays that happened, which meant that some of the work just had to stop if we didn't have the materials we needed. So it's been a very, very slow process. And again, if you've been on Water Street and you've seen the project advance, I know many of you have sent questions about, well, what's happening now, and where are we now, and where are we going? So it again has been a very, very interesting process to be doing this in the midst of everything else going on. But overall, it's also been a blessing in disguise, since we were not holding events in the lawn, so we didn't have the pressure of trying to meet any kind of deadline. We just knew that we couldn't have in-person events for most of this year, and so it did give us the freedom to take a breath and let things take their course. As we went along, again, the visible part of the project is that fence itself. And pretty early on, we ran into some surprises, which maybe shouldn't have surprised us, since we are located on Water Street. So here you can see a photograph of the hole that is being excavated, where we had intended to pour the concrete foundation for the brick columns that would be at the pedestrian entrance to the property. And pretty much at 3 feet, the contractors discovered that there was water filling the holes. And so again, we're very close to the water. There's a lot of underground springs in this area. There's a lot of runoff from the top of the hill where the Hedge House sits, all the way down to the base of the hill here. And so we had to sort of pivot and say, well, we can't pour concrete, as we intended to, right into these holes. We have to get them below 4 feet, so they're below the frost level. And so we ended up debating a lot of ideas, and ultimately we poured the concrete footings for those columns above ground on the Hedge House lawn, as you can see here. And then the contractors moved the concrete footings into the holes after dewatering them, pumping out the water, so that they could make sure that the bottom of the holes were prepared correctly and were level. And so that was, again, just one of those strange things that happens when you're doing a construction project, whether it's a landscaping project or a building project. Sometimes you run into a surprise that makes you change course a little bit. But we did eventually get those foundations in, and we did get our brick columns finished. And so if you go by the Hedge House today, you will see the brick columns. They are at the corners of the property, and then also obviously at the gate. So we do have the pedestrian gate on Water Street where it usually was, and then we also have a vehicle gate for accessing the lawn on Memorial Drive, again where it had been previously. And just to mention, we were, of course, dealing with a historic property and dealing with this, wanting to take that inspiration from Joseph Everett Chandler, and we deliberately chose bricks that are made here in Massachusetts. So we ordered bricks from the Stiles and Hart Company in Bridgewater, which was established at the end of the 19th century and is actually the only existing brick manufacturer still in business in Massachusetts. And so they use a traditional New England brick molding process, which again looks a little more rustic perhaps than bricks that you can get today, but we thought that suited the historic house well and sort of tied in. We have a lot of brick elements throughout the property, and so we thought this helped tie all of that together. I can't give you a photograph of the metalwork that will connect all of these brick columns because that is the last piece of the puzzle that we're waiting on. We currently have been waiting for quite a number of weeks for the galvanizer to have us have our pieces in production. So the fabricator of these beautiful metalwork pieces that will go between the brick columns, and here you can see the design of the pedestrian gate for Water Street with sort of this half scroll, the scroll work at the top of it. We're still waiting on that. I have my fingers crossed that the installation will actually start next week. So if you're downtown next week, you may see the actual fence going in. And then once the metalwork is installed, the contractors will then put the caps on top of those brick columns. So they will be finished off as well. So right now they just look like chimney stacks or something, but I promise they will be finished and they will be elegant, and we will have a fence to connect them and gates to connect them. So that's what we're going for the future. But at the same time, some other elements of the project may not have been as noticeable. So we have a series of brick walkways throughout the property. Some of the bricks has sort of settled and were a little bit uneven in places. And so the contractors actually replaced different sections to make them safer. We also had them reset the granite steps, as you can see here, which again had sunk in a little bit over the years. And so we wanted to make sure that they were level and safe for visitors. And these steps will have a metal handrail installed as well. So they have not had a handrail. And again, we're just trying to make sure that there are these safety features on the property. And we had to actually extend the walkway to the front sidewalk on the Water Street side. And I'm very excited to share that we were actually given bricks that were manufactured by the Hedge family. So the Hedge family who moved into the Hedge House, our Hedge House in 1830, did own a brick manufactory, and many hedge bricks stamped Hedge and some that aren't stamped Hedge, but some of these 19th century bricks do show up in different places throughout Plymouth. And one of those places was the 1820 Courthouse. So when the courthouse was being transformed into Plymouth's new town hall, a lot of materials were salvaged, and the Bill Cohane of the Community Preservation Committee salvaged a lot of these Hedge bricks. And so the CPC very kindly donated them to us for this project, so that when you arrive at the Hedge House and you start walking up that main pathway, that first set of bricks, which as you can see are laid out in a herringbone pattern, are all Hedge bricks, period Hedge bricks. And so we even have a few that are stamped with the Hedge name. So we hope that as visitors come in, their eyes will be drawn to that, and they'll at least have a question about how these Hedge bricks are connected with the Hedge family who lived in the Hedge House. So that's just one of those small special things that came out of the project as we were working on it. We did install a Mow Strip, as you can see here. And again, it does not look like this anymore since the soil has been leveled and grass has been planted, but one of our major considerations was how can we create a fence that is relatively easy to maintain. Brick and metalwork, galvanized steel are items that should not need a lot of maintenance, but one thing that can cause paint and other paint to chip off of galvanized metalwork is of course weed whackers and lawnmowers and things like that. And so one of the advice we took was to put a Mow Strip there at the base of the fence, so that you don't need to weed whack under the metalwork, and you can hopefully keep it from having any issues in the future. So that's sort of one of those modern conveniences that we did install. Something that you can't see in the photograph, and you won't really see if you come to the Hedge House, is that we have installed electricity under the front lawn. So 4 of the columns on the Hedge House property now have electrical outlets in them. And this is something that has long been needed by the Antiquarian Society and other groups holding events on the front lawn because we didn't have any electricity, which meant we would either have to bring in a generator or we would have to run electrical cords all the way from the house itself. And that's in some cases there would be too much electricity, overloading the current system, and that would cause problems. Or of course, just having lots of cords running through the property would cause tripping hazards. And so now it's very exciting to know that we have electricity right there at the front of the property and the side of the property on Memorial Drive side as well, so that we can again have host events that require electricity, whether it's music for dancing or something for cooking food or keeping food cold or keeping food hot. So all sorts of good things. And then finally, I'm going to share this photograph because I think it's beautiful. We did put irrigation in the lawn as well. And so this is really key for us because for those of you who have been to a summer fair or who have been to the Plymouth Lions Club Thirsty Pilgrim Beer Festival, you know that by the middle of the summer and certainly by the end of the summer, the grass previously was just dead, dried out. Often, you have sort of thousands of people trampling the lawn during the Thirsty Pilgrim, and they're kicking up dust, and it's just a very difficult location again to have an event and keep the lawn in good health. And so the irrigation was really a necessity so that we could make sure that the lawn stays green and healthy and can support these large-scale events. And that really is one of the key factors or the key components of our vision for the Hedge House property is that, we see it as one of the premier event spaces on the waterfront. We have, of course, enjoyed for many years hosting our events there, whether it's the summer fair or the Acoustic Nights concert series. And we really love having the community come together when we're able safely to come together and just enjoy the location, enjoy the view of the harbor, enjoy this wonderful view of this federal style house, really one of a kind, certainly in Plymouth, but really just one of a kind in standing on its own as this beautiful, beautiful federal architecture. We tell part of Plymouth's story that isn't told anywhere else in the Hedge House, and we want to make sure people feel welcome and that people are safe when they come to visit us. And we, of course, love having other community groups have their events on the lawn. So I mentioned the Plymouth Lions Club and the Thirsty Pilgrim. And we have even in the past had private events like weddings. And so, in our post-2020 world, we're hoping that we can have more events, both public and private, and that this will just be a gathering place and a community space, as well as being an appropriate setting for the historic Hedge House. And I am now going to turn it over to Bob. So I will stop sharing my screen so that Bob can start sharing his screen. And I did not mention at all the plantings that we did as part of this project. And so Bob is going to talk about his work in designing our planting beds, and then he'll also talk a little bit just about historic plantings in general and choosing plants for historic sites, whether they're historic sites like ours that are preserved as museums, or even your own house if you live in a historic home. So.
Okay. Can you see me yet?
Yeah, we can see you. Yeah, thank you, Bob.
Okay.
That worked well.
Well, those are some great pictures, Ann. I really enjoyed seeing the old pictures of the house. And it's amazing to think that all that was moved, when it was. But as Ann said, I'm Bob Hoxie. I'm a horticulturalist and a garden designer. And here's a picture of me doing what I do best, which is walking around staring at plants all day. Well, not really. What I'm really doing is standing in a oceanfront wildflower meadow that I designed and maintained for several years in the early 2000s. And it was there where I sort of developed my philosophy of landscape design. And that includes following nature, kind of being inspired by nature, create evocative plantings and also to make them fun. You want to share certain elements and kind of bring a light touch to some of the plantings that we do and some of the designs. So how did I do that? When I came to do a planting for the Out Front project, I started out with some simple design goals. I needed to use historically appropriate plants, and I wanted to select plants that were tough enough to survive along the Plymouth waterfront. And I think something that was important to me and also to several members of the board was that they be native plants, particularly plants that's specifically native to southern coastal New England. That's important both from a ecological point of view and from an aesthetic point of view. And finally, we wanted to link the new plantings with the larger landscape at the Hedge House. So if you take a look at this photo, it's a picture of looking up the hill. Mamma Mia's is on the left, and there's a chain link fence along the property line and a long big strip of weeds that was there for a couple of years until things really got going. And that's where the new planting was going to go. And it had to be in kind of a narrow profile because we didn't want to cut into the lawn too much and take up event space. So that meant using plants that were going to grow tall, but not really spread out so that ultimately they're encroaching on the walk. And one of those photos that Ann showed, you could see that by the 1970s, the trees were kind of growing out almost to the walk, or maybe that was a little earlier. And then because they were so close, they had to be removed. So let's take a closer look at the profile. This is Mamma Mia's restaurant. And you can see there's, I'll say it's a great restaurant and good food, and they're great neighbors. But you can see there's a lot there that isn't that aesthetically pleasing. There's the deck and various services, the gas line. And as you move further along, you see the kitchen area with the exhaust fans and the air conditioning, a gap between the parking lot and a secondary building. So all that really, we want to screen that, and we wanted to create privacy and at the same time create a sort of historic look that would complement the Hedge House and something that would be sustainable over time, because we're dealing with a longer time frame here than we would be if we were doing a commercial building or just a planting on someone's house, which may last 10 years or 20 years. We're kind of looking for the next 100 years here, really. And the project continues on up to the existing fence at the Hedge House. And you can see that this is probably the ugliest part of it, which fortunately you no longer see, but some of the goals were to also create a new wooden fence that would join in with this one. So those are kind of the challenges. And how did I really go about doing this? Did I use Google? Did I use historic documents? Did I look at old photographs? Those are all things we do when we start thinking about creating a historic landscape or historic buildings. But if you remember, I said that I like to walk. And one of my walks, here's what I found. This is a 19th century old farm. It's now part of a conservation area down on the Cape in Marston's Mills. And you can see there's a great old evergreen hedgerow that separates the fields. I'm guessing these trees are probably between 80 and 100 years old. Most of them are our old friend Easton Red Cedar. A lot of people who live in the area know Easton Red Cedar. It grows in the beaches and takes over in fields and spaces. It provides good nesting locations for birds, and the berries are also a high energy food for the birds. If you closer look at them, you can see they're still very pyramidal. They haven't really spread out that much, so they're a good sort of upright plant. And another shot of that, you can see there are gaps where it was probably for livestock gates to come through into the field. And in the background, there's some deciduous trees that are providing some height and also some additional structure and interest. So now I kind of had a template, and I had plants that I'd like to use, the red cedars predominantly. And here's how it looked when we got the plants in. This again is the view from Mamma Mia's. It's obviously changed quite a bit from the earlier photos. You can see the new fence, the new wooden fence that mimics the old fence at the existing fence at the other part of the hedge house. And it's again starting down towards the street there, Water Street. You can see we put in a low planting of shrubs because that's the Mamma Mia's dining room behind it. And we wanted to be good neighbors, and we didn't want to ultimately screen off the view and have the diners looking at a bunch of the backs of a bunch of trees. So I put in bayberry there and some beach plum. Again, good native southern coastal New England plants that have berries and fruits that are good for the birds and for the wildlife, and that are exceptionally hardy. Over time, those will grow up. They'll probably get to the top of the wooden fence, but they won't, again, block that view. And as we go up a little further, you can see that there's our first group of cedars that will grow up and soften the look of the building and the air conditioning and the exhaust fans, and provide a good cover. Also, again, for wildlife and privacy. At the end of the row of cedars, you can see there's a gate, and that's to provide access between the two properties. And just to the right of the gate, we put a tree, and this is going back to the deciduous trees, and that's a Tupelo or a black gum. Again, it's a native plant which grows along the edges of the beaches and in wetlands, and it has great red foliage in almost this time of year now, and it'll also grow up to a sort of pyramidal architectural form that will fill that whole space between the two buildings. That's kind of what I was looking to do, because we didn't have a lot of room to put deciduous trees in, because if they were further along or on the other side there, they'd be growing right into Mamma Mia's. And again, we don't want to have the tree branches growing in the windows. So this is, again, Tupelo Black Gum. And I'm going to skip down to the Cape again, and I'll show you what mature specimens look like. And you can see they have that great arching structure, and they're very sort of architectural, that provide a good statement in a planting. And we move up again, and you can see there's another row of cedars, which should, in fairly short order, screen out the outbuilding there, which I guess is kind of a secondary kitchen or service building for the restaurant. And finally, on the end of that, if you continue along the fence, there's another Tupelo tree, which will grow up and sort of accent the corner of the hedge house. And that kind of joins up with the existing plantings at the hedge house, including the LeBaron Bell, which was put in a few years ago. And you can see I've used some of the same things. I've used bayberry, and there's some other cedars in the background. And that kind of follows down the brick pathways, one of the many brick pathways that we have at the hedge house, to the main patio of the Rose T. Briggs Memorial Garden. So here's my favorite shot of the garden, actually. It's kind of a nighttime shot or an evening shot, which a lot of people don't get to see. You don't get to see the lights on like that, and sort of very peaceful, restful look to it. And you can see there's a cedar tree there too to kind of pick up on the same theme. And that was what what we were trying to do. We created a simple planting and just a few types of trees and some shrubs, but they all sort of tie together, and they will provide screening and privacy and ecological benefits to wildlife for hopefully for another 100 years. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, and thanks for watching and joining us tonight. And I really want to thank the Antiquarian Society for moving ahead with this project, and to sort of paraphrase Rose Briggs's quote, moving forward with the courage to plant the garden again. And now I guess we're going to have some questions, or turn it back to Anne.
Thank you, Bob. That was great. Thank you for that overview, and thank you for all of your work. Just designing the landscape plan, not just for the new plantings, but also, of course, in the Rose Briggs garden itself. And again, I think we're all seeing the benefit of your hard work and your vision, because now that the plants are growing and filling out, and everything is just such a lovely space. So. We certainly have lots of time for questions, so we wanted this to be a chance for any of you who may have seen things happening and had a question about something, or who just have a question in general about the design or the plan, or a question about historic landscape gardening. Feel free to use the chat feature, or to use the Q&A feature to send out a question to us. If you have any, and of course there's no pressure if you don't have questions. we'll accept that as a sign that everyone's just very excited, as we are, to see the project come to completion. Again, and sometimes it's interesting to see the little things that we think of and decide to do in order to improve the space. So even I was thinking, as Bob was talking, one of the things we did was move the Hedge House sign, so it's on the left side of the front walkway instead of the right side. So we've sort of opened up more of the lawn itself, the more level part of the lawn for event space. Okay, great. We have a question from Sue, who asks, are you going to fill in the low spots on the lawn? And that's a great question, yes, because I pointed out some of those uneven and low areas in the photos from 5 years ago. And yes, so the contractors have graded before they planted the grass seed. They graded that front lawn area, and so it's not. It's not flat, because in order to make that slope flat, we would have actually had to terrace the whole lawn. But it is even, so that you don't have to worry about walking across the lawn and falling into a hole. So it's much improved. And one other thing that I did not mention earlier was just that we do have a beautiful line of linden trees on the property that line Memorial Drive. And when we worked with an arborist last year to actually lift their canopy, so he came, John Scaglarini came, and he lifted the canopy so that before that we had branches going all the way to the ground. And now they look so nice, so they're much healthier, that they don't have that burden of all those branches. And it really opens up the view from Memorial Drive. And even if you're ever at Wood Seafood on the wharf and you look back, it really opens it up so you can see the Hedge House very clearly. So we like to be seen. We like people to know that we're there. And John, actually, when he was doing the work, he thought that those trees are probably, 70, 75 years old. So we wanted to preserve those trees as much as possible. Someday, undoubtedly, they will come down. But at this time, we did want to be true to having those beautiful lines of trees just as you go up the hill. And then we have a number of locust trees that are in our parking lot area. So we have 2 locust trees. So those we also decided to keep, and maybe a future plan for the property would be actually looking at that parking lot area and doing some re-landscaping there. So stay tuned for that. Paula is asking, when do you envision being able to open the house to the public? Well, that's a great question, Paula. We actually are open. We did open the Hedge House a few weeks ago. So we are offering tours of the first floor of the Hedge House only by advance reservation. So we have if you go on our website, which is PlymouthAntiquarian.org, you can find our tours and ticketing page. So you can actually purchase a ticket, and it has to be for a specific time. So we are open Thursday through Sunday from 10 to 5. So the last tour is offered at 4, but we do need you to purchase that ticket in advance so that we actually have someone here to greet you and give you the tour, because otherwise we are not open for walk-ins. But of course, tours are free for Plymouth residents and for Antiquarian Society members. So you don't need to use that ticketing site in order to purchase a ticket. If you are a member or a Plymouth resident, you can simply call the office, and we would be happy to schedule a tour for you for one of those time slots. And that way you could come in and see the house. And of course, you know, while you're visiting the house, you can feel free to walk into the Rose Briggs garden and to walk the brick pathways and see where we are with those brick columns. But hopefully we will be able to open both floors of the house next season when conditions permit. Right now we're just being very careful to follow the COVID-19 guidelines as provided by the Commonwealth, and so we're just being careful to make sure that we're in spaces inside that are big enough that we can social distance ourselves from the tour guide. And so we are asking that if you make a reservation, that you make it with just someone in your household or in your friend group, so that way we're never putting 2 groups of strangers together, and that, you know, to keep people safe. So anyways, all of that was a long answer, but the house is open and you can visit the website PlymouthAntiquarian.org for the details on those tours. But again, we would hope, we are looking forward in 2021, hopefully, to being able to have a ribbon cutting and a formal ceremony to really unveil the completed frontage project, to welcome you all to the Hedge House property, and to have a dedication of the LeBaron Bell, which, as Bob mentioned, was donated to us by Dean LeBaron, a descendant of Dr. Francis LeBaron, a 17th century Frenchman who came to Plymouth. And so you know, all of this is part of this long-term project to really create this perfect setting for the Hedge House. And so we hope to have a grand event where we can celebrate all that's happened over the past few years. So let's see. Bob, I don't see any other questions.
Oh. Well, let me just say that I'm really enjoying working, you know, with the Antiquarian Society, and it's an opportunity, as I mentioned, to do something on a much longer time frame than you usually get with landscape design, because we're, as I say, hopefully doing things that people generations from now are going to look back and say, well, look at what they did, and this is how it worked. And it's a great thing, and I would encourage people to visit the Hedge House and to support the Antiquarian Society.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Bob. And again, I would just want to thank Bob for his work, and of course to thank all of the many people who've donated to the project since 2015. You are very much appreciated, and your support and patience is appreciated. And I'd like to again thank Bill Forniciari and Ray Denetz, who have been the architects on the project in different periods of its existence. And then to thank the Antiquarian Society's Preservation Committee and board members for all the work that they've done. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, to thank the Community Preservation Committee and Bill for donating those hedge bricks, which again is just one of those special features of the property. And of course, none of this would be happening except that our landscaping contractor, Sheridan Landscaping, has been great to work with. I think they envisioned this as a very, you know, a 2 to 3 month project, and here it is, 6+ months, I think. So we've all been sticking it out together, and again, it's lovely to have something like this to be working on, so that we really can anticipate a future, hopefully not too very far away, when we will be able to gather together again and have a summer fair, and have a Thirsty Pilgrim, and have weddings, and have tea parties and dances and all sorts of things. So there's hopefully many bright days ahead for the Antiquarian Society and for the Plymouth community. So I think, Bob, since I don't see any other questions coming in, I think we can just, we probably just end it right here. And that way,
Okay.
I know it's a Friday night, so people may have other things on their plates. So we are, Bob, I don't know if you can see the chat box, but we're getting a lot of thank yous from attendees, and everyone says that they're excited to see it soon in person. So I think we'll leave it at that, where we're excited to have you come and see it soon in person. So hopefully next spring and summer you'll have many opportunities.